a team of all women. Used to always say that it was us being kind and caring for the people around us that mattered more to him than any of the trophies we ever brought back. He also used to yell at me every time I was like afraid to hit someone, and I think I really ingrained that and stopped talking myself down before rounds, and I owe like everything I have to him, truly. This next ring Robin actually gave me 2 days ago to wear for the weekend. It's a roommate ring from Robin and roommates at the I Street house where Robin lived last year, and I spent, I don't know, like maybe 30 or more days on the couch over the course of the semester or the year, because every time I was bored with my life, I went to BC. This ring is from an ex, but the card that came with it was the trust in yourself is greater than the trust in anyone else around you. And I think it's meaningful, so I keep the ring. This one is from my grandma. This bracelet is also from my grandma. Robin has a matching one because my grandma was very excited to get to give matching bracelets to Robin and I last summer. And there are a couple of other friends on the league who have similar ones, but not the same one. But that from my grandma, and the earrings and necklace from my mom, who my mom is probably really excited that this is my last tournament, because every time I'm like, Robin and I are stressed about debate, she's like, when is this silly debate thing going to be over for you? It's been many years and I'm excited for you to be done. So to my mother, this is close to done, but to my grandma, don't worry, I'll fight till it is, because I don't think she's ready for it to be done. This bracelet is from friends who I hold really close to my heart. And that's all the jewelry. So that's all the jewelry pleasantries. A last pleasantry to spectators, folks in the South. For all the love and support that you've given Robin and I this year, like truly from the bottom of my heart, thank you. This year has been a lot. It is hard being a Southern toady running team at Northern tournaments weekend after weekend and not getting to see judges or friends when you're in person. And I think you all have made a lot of that more meaningful in texts, in like crowns, everything. It takes a whole fucking village, and thank you for being mine. Robert and Devesh, you got the nice pleasantry round 4 too, but thank you for being friends. You made this year a lot better in a lot of different ways. Judges, thank you for judging. I hope you'll enjoy this round. This case is actually the first case that Robin and I ever had a conversation about 2 years and 2 months ago at the SWAT 2020 tournament, when Robin was sitting at the front of the room furiously typing. And I was like, what are you working on? And she was like, Parker's back tab says I'm hitting Devesh and Max next round, and I don't have a case to run on them. So I'm working on this one. 2 years later, I'm glad I can give you the chance to finally run it on them. Case is not targeted. I think this is a really interesting debate. I hope you all think so too. And I hope people enjoy the round. I don't think there are any. Oh no, there's a last pleasantry. Not Ollie, Jonas, Caden, Ethan, thank you for being here on a Sunday that you could be out gallivanting in Boston, but more importantly, thank you for giving me a second chance at this activity and for being a home and a family. I like truly owe everything I have to you all and the team, but like you all, especially specifically. Cool. There is a single sentence of background and then case statement. There are no caveats. So I'm not going to put it in the bit.ly. I think y'all will be okay if I just read it out loud. I will read it slowly. But is everyone ready? Beautiful. Following the Pulse massacre, a number of prominent queer advocacy groups began pursuing gun control legislation, largely coordinated through the Pride Fund to end gun violence. Case statement, this House believes they shouldn't do this.
Can you just reread it one more time?
Absolutely. Following the Pulse massacre, a number of prominent queer advocacy groups began pursuing gun control legislation, largely coordinated through the Pride Fund to end gun violence. This House believes they should not do this. I am happy to answer questions, give you all time to just like ruminate, think, prep. Whatever's helpful.
Yeah, we'll probably take a minute and then we'll start with questions.
Absolutely.
Feel free to start time.
Yep. I actually started time before I read case statement. I don't know if that, I thought that is what tab policy is. It's like 40 seconds, but okay.
All right, this is an evaluative case.
What?
We're evaluating their choice as a third party.
It's normative.
Okay, cool. And yeah, normative.
I apparently have not had enough coffee to answer.
Is the debate retrospective or are we placing ourselves in this time period?
We're placing ourselves in this time period.
Okay, so I can't make statements really about things that have happened afterwards.
Yeah, polls happened in 2016. It was June of 2016. So we're like probably not talking about June 13th, like the day after, but like broadly like that summer, those like ensuing months. So anything that's happened in the past 6 years, probably not in the scope of the round. But I don't think there's like a significant number of like events that have happened in the past 6 years that like I'm like going to explicitly say you can't use because unless you all have questions about like if something has happened or is in the scope of the debate.
Could you talk a little bit more about the Pride Fund?
Yeah, it's so a few members of the queer community who I think have been involved with other gun control organizations or just like generally active in the policy space formed the organization, like specifically in response to the shooting. It's a political action committee. They like endorse candidates who want to do gun control or like gun policy reforms with a focus on like LGBT safety and equality. They did some fundraising. They like endorsed candidates in 2016 and I think also 2018 midterms. Also apparently 2020. Yeah, if you have more specific questions, I can answer them. But honestly, the arguments are not super specific to like the characterization of the organization. You are free to characterize what you think it's likely to look like.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I was.
Oh, here, what gun was used in the Pulse massacre?
I'm not sure. And then you want to
I'm
go.
checking.
You guys like have a semi-automatic rifle, maybe?
I think it was an AR-15, but I want to double check.
It's a lock. Oh, there are a series of guns listed in this. So it says weapons, semi-automatic rifle, and Glock 17 semi-atomic automatic pistol. I'm uncertain. Oh, he was armed with a semi-automatic rifle and a Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol. I don't think it says which he specifically used, but that is what he had.
That's fine. The Pride Fund is distinct from the organizations that are providing funding to the Pride Fund. Is that right?
So the Pride Fund is distinct from like queer advocates and like other broad queer groups that are now supporting and funneling like energy and resources into the Pride Fund. So cases like specifically about.
Presumably they get donations from individual donors or I don't know, however PACs usually earn money.
Broadly, like also, you know, there are people who donate directly to the Pride Fund who are like prominent queer advocates who, if you want to make characterizations of or like talk about, but it is about like the funneling through that group, yeah.
Are there any other organizations that you mentioned in the case or in other speeches?
There are, Case mentions the DNC, or like Brown has in the past mentioned the DNC. I think you all know what the DNC is. If you want more
NRA exists.
The NRA is
a lot of lobbying power.
There are other organizations that do like gun control advocacy. So like the Brady Fund, Moms for Sensible Gun Reform. So like none of those organizations are mentioned by name, but like there are other organizations that do gun control advocacy that exist out in the world that are not queer specific, but you know, I will just tell you do exist.
Okay. Got it.
Matt, that was for you.
Yes. You're so smart, Robert. We'll probably take a couple more minutes just to like ruminate.
Absolutely. While you're doing that, I forgot a pleasantry. I told Dominic I would give him a shout out for having a round with Robin and I a year ago on this case at like 9:45 p.m. on a Thursday night on Zoom. I told Dominic I'd give him a shout out for it. Thanks, Dom. Love you.
I know stocks.
I already made a PMR doc for it.
Is it the one that's just called case name PMR? Or is it specific?
It's the one, it's in our notes folder. I just made a doc called Coder PMR. So I'm gonna just, oh, it is actually. It's not good.
It isn't that much. Okay, I'll delete the Octopus doc that I made then because that's just there.
Could you read case statement one more time?
Sure. Case statement is just this house believes they should not do this.
Who's they?
The people who
Queer
are
advocacy groups and queer advocates
the
who
Pride Fund.
support and
Wait,
fund.
those were two different answers, though. Like,
Queer advocates and queer groups that organize through the Pride Fund
okay,
should not organize through the Pride Fund.
And that was the pictures better.
Also like, how much time are we at right now?
8:20.
You all have 5 minutes, just like continue.
Absolutely.
No, actually, I'm gonna be that gov team that cuts off POCs for the first time in my life and Matt's not around.
I don't know, more PCs, better rounds. Winning seems easy.
I might use the bathroom. You guys are just gonna prep panels, or if you ask like a question that you think is relevant, for attention to that, maybe just-
Okay.
So I use the bathroom like 2 times per round. I don't want to do it.
Probably read the messages.
Where did you trust?
On the floor.
So, is the case statement, or like the word, the sentence versus what did you ask? It's individual people.
It's, so there are individual advocates in the queer community and queer advocacy groups that all funnel through the Pride Fund. It is broadly that they should not do this.
So you're also not going to be like X different group of actors should do this,
Yeah,
to be clear.
So it's individuals and groups that are both doing this.
yeah.
Cool. And then, to the extent that there exists some kind of counterfactual.
We
as a
will
meta
allow
thing-
the counterfactual to be relatively up for debate.
Okay,
We will not caveat out a certain counterfactual.
right. And so like we're debating about what the probable counterfactual would then be, not just about like, you could do X, so therefore you shouldn't do
Yeah,
it.
you can make arguments about probable count.
Okay, cool. What's up?
Go ahead.
Oh, to be clear, not all queer groups or queer advocates did this, so we can characterize which subset of them did.
Ask that question again.
Like, we're defending the status quo.
Yes.
So therefore, when you say queer groups and queer advocates did X, we can characterize which specific queer groups and queer advocates did do X and give warranted reasons why.
Yeah.
Okay. Was someone saying something about time?
Yeah, I was gonna say you got like a minute left.
Okay. Well, as soon as time runs out, feel free to start. Thank you for affording us this time. You know we do the same for you.
I was gonna say, in
I
good
would feel
faith.
like an asshole if I was like, y'all have given us 15 minutes of prep every time we mocked you.
Even if
have
you
to
hadn't
leave.
given us 15 minutes of prep, I would still give you 15, to be clear.
I don't know, I think it's someone.
If you cut it off, it would maybe cut it off, but like,
Anyway.
It'll be better.
okay, I have us at 15:07, so,
Can you explain what that message you sent to me means?
oh. Okay. Cool. Is everyone ready? Lovely. Our first independent point is about your goals. If gun control is inconsistent with your movement, you shouldn't pursue it, even if it would produce good consequences. First, obligations should only be to your core interests. First, under this modified labor theory of value, you're an extension of the hopes, dreams, blood, sweat, and tears that seep life into the queer rights movement. Your advocacy group exists because millions of hours of activists marching through storms, passing leaflets out under siege from violent threats, and wearing hands raw knocking on doors. People take pay cuts to work for you all because the meaning of the work gives them. You accept money from donors on the promise that you'll represent them. Changing issues is tantamount to theft. You should soar your core constituency, not your wins. Second, questions of responsibility. Maybe giving food to people in the third world is good, but that doesn't mean that you should drop everything and pursue that. The Democratic Party, PTAs nationwide, and numerous gun control specific advocacy groups will keep pushing for gun control whether or not you do. Third, your people need you. You're uniquely positioned via your connections and involvement with the community to provide a much needed route to representation for the unheard. Fourth, compromise is inevitable when you expand your position. If a politician is really good on gun control but bad on employment discrimination, it's harder to hold them accountable for their bad position while simultaneously rewarding them for their good one. Second subpoint is that gun control is fundamentally inconsistent with your obligations. The right to bear arms is a check against democratic power of a majority that wishes to oppress a minority segment of the population through population political control. Guns provide a unique source of safety against the two branches of federal government and 25 states that want to oppress queer folks. Even in cases on the law is on the right side, lawful ownership of guns prevents police from infringing on protections with the implicit threat of force, instead ensuring that they only search homes with warrants and deterring unwanted harassment. In conservative areas, people may know that sympathetic judges, juries, and DAs won't convict them for harassment and violence. This means that guns are the only protection that some people have, particularly the most disadvantaged of your movement. For many, the everyday experience of harassment and threats of violence subjugates, excludes, and deprives queer people of basic liberties. At the core of these threats is an implied vulnerability that is self-reinforcing. The harassed and harasser know that should the situation escalate, the aggressor has the upper hand and would be backed up by bystanders. This appeasement of harassment in the face of an implicit and constant violent threat is humiliating and autonomy constraining. Owning a gun equalizes the dynamic and forces the aggressor to stay silent and show respect. Overcriminalization of gay people for gun ownership is basically inevitable. Beyond disparate law enforcement at the local level, in order to get gun laws passed, there need to be political trades made to moderates that will result in the devolution of authority to the state level and criminalization of minorities. For example, a mental health provision could, under the wrong state interpretation, be used to classify various gender or sexual minorities as mental illness. History is on our side. Original gun control laws were passed to persecute the Black Panthers who required guns for safety when supervising police and holding peaceful demonstrations. There isn't an overriding reason that queer individuals care more about gun control than straight people who are most likely to care to protect people with mental illness or people of color who get attention within gun control organizing anyways. Last but most importantly, guns are essential for personal safety in rural areas, which possesses a potent combination of hateful values and lack of police policing. Police are unlikely to take queer issues seriously, and even if they did, they are unable to show up before a crime has already happened. Hate crimes may draw on short-term emotional responses, so it's unclear that eventual capture by law enforcement serves as a meaningful deterrent. Second independent point is about effectiveness. Gun control discourse is bad for the movement and will increase violence. First is that gun control discourse is a bad thing to associate with. Legislative strategies that garner media attention directly reflect upon the identity group doing the advocacy. By promoting gun control, it feminizes and reentrenches stereotypes about LGBT passivity. This association makes it harder for people to hold jobs as employers typecast them rather than objectively evaluate their skill set. Cultural perceptions of weakness, passivity, and nonviolence are linked to homophobic violence and harmful cognitive dissonance. Additionally, your rhetoric will co-opt other parts of the movement by shifting the focus on the cause of violence from homophobia to the existence of guns. This makes it much harder to challenge the structural root causes of homophobic violence that occurs in a multitude of forms at the micro level and doesn't need guns to occur, as it often happens in contexts like inside the home where the victim is already powerless. Your core supporters who would be very dedicated to your cause will be less dedicated, less likely to donate if they feel less represented. Among those who care about gun control, it's unlikely that the shift will change their allocation amount, and even if it does, the new money only offsets new expenses accrued by new issues. Why would they donate to you over an established gun control group that has a proven record? Risk-taking concessions in court appointments because judges are good for individual rights are bad on guns, since the majority of recent victories have been through the courts. This is a huge problem. Second subpoint is on the circumvention and political violence. People buy extra guns if they anticipate gun control and sell them on the gray market when they have too many. Thinking that scarcity will make their guns worth more, or thinking that this will be the last chance to get them, they accumulate them. Then when they need the money for other stuff after they calm down, they sell them at gun shows and on Craigslist to people without background checks. Crazy white terrorists strengthen their beliefs in anti-government conspiracy theories and begin to think that violence is the only way to achieve the change that they want. Lone wolf terrorists with conservative leanings are even more likely to blame gun control as part of a larger conspiracy. If gun control does ever get passed, since demand appears inelastic, this creates a vacuum for a new black market. This funding stream will support violent gangs and radical groups. Third independent point is about movement politics. As an overview, let's be clear that this is the least important of the issues. Movements rely on telling the truth to create widespread social consciousness and create long-run, hard to define and predict change. Prioritizing donors and definable metrics turns you into a profit-seeking business, ultimately corrupting your core motivation. That said, two huge trade-offs. First, on monetary trade-offs. Scaling up for any new issues requires front expenditures in the form of hiring new staff, finding new volunteers who are interested in the issue, acquiring expertise, and producing content about the issue. This means that unless the movement can produce tangible results, it's guaranteed to be a net negative experiment. Money spent on expensive court battles and extended lobbying campaigns at the federal level required by the Second Amendment will be extremely draining and could hamper morale. Alternative activities that generate more money as people's circumstances improve will give you more political power. Fixing employment discrimination allows you to have a larger economic support base to pursue campaigns in the future. Pushing to elect queer politicians will increase representation and visibility. As the social clout of your members rises, so do your political fortunes. Second, on supporter trade-off. This posture loses some and gains no one. Since other pure gun control groups exist and other groups that care about LGBTQ rights and gun control exist, it's unclear why someone would choose to get more involved with queer rights because of this stance. Conversely, rural or conservative members of the community may feel alienated because of the posture and stop turning out or get less involved. There's a good chance that this fractures the radical wing. Extreme anti-establishment radicals will react poorly to the infringement on individual liberty and will stir controversy within the academy and organization. This trades off with time they could be spending producing content that furthers a common cause and makes it hard to present a coherent message to the public. Best case scenario where adopting gun control works and garners support, it'll teach the wrong lesson and encourage continual addition of new general welfare issues to the platform until it's functionally impossible to distinguish your movement and organizations from the DNC. This makes it essentially impossible to hold the DNC accountable when you become more like them. Some of the strongest support for the queer movement has been from hardcore libertarians with tons of Silicon Valley money. The only thing worse for losing this donor base would be coming out in support of the Iraq War or criminalizing weed. Powerful pro-gun lobbying groups like the NRA now have an incentive to gay bash as a tool to discredit the gun control position, spilling over into worse outcomes in other areas. This turns religious conservatives who are open to narratives about gun control that are about protecting children, doing background checks, or taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers away from the movement because they hate queer people and don't want to associate with them. This is an overriding belief because it's deeply ideological and stops compromise on other issues that are likely to be significantly more important. This also strengthens social conservatives who can lump gayness into the liberal agenda and polarize people on it, making queer rights an issue like climate change that always splits on party lines. This is particularly harmful as Republicans have substantial control over state governments. Gun control from any source increases voter turnout and campaign donations among Republicans, for many of whom this is the most important issue. When they win, especially when you divide the issue on party lines, your movement suffers. Democrats don't benefit proactively from gun control because their base is more invested in other issues like minority rights, education, poverty, and the environment. These reasons, incredibly proud to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister and invite up the leader of the
Before I start, I just want to give some quick thank yous. No one from BU is here, but thank you to the organizers of this tournament for doing a fantastic job. Thank you to everyone who has made APTA possible this year. So that means the judges who come time and time again to watch our runs, give us feedback, make sure that these tournaments can function in a high quality way and in a fair way. To the folks on the APTA board, people like Dominic, people like Hannah and Rana. I know we annoy you sometimes with our requests for all kinds of things, but we truly do appreciate it. And we hope you guys continue to stick around and help make this league what it is. It's been fantastic. Even though the audience isn't on our side today, thank you all for being here. You all are all good friends and we do appreciate you being here. It's been great to meet all of you. Robert and Ananya, y'all have been fantastic friends this year. It was so great to get to know you this year. Even with our little toady race, it was a great time. We would not have had nearly as much fun debating online all these weekends, giving up our weekends if we didn't have friends we could talk to about, complain about things about, and run our econ cases on and actually get a favorable response. So thank you for that. And Robert, finally, thank you for being the toad to my frog. Thank you for being one of my best friends. You're a fantastic debater, an amazing friend. I definitely wouldn't have done this if I didn't have you as my partner and you by my side. And I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished and everything you will accomplish next year on our team and as one of my friends. Did I miss anyone? No. If I did, sorry. Thanks, Jasmine. Okay. All right. There are two arguments we want to forward on our off case. Firstly, who are the groups that are doing this and why do they specifically have obligations to act in this way? I'm first going to characterize what these groups look like. Then I'm going to explain why they have binding and enforceable moral obligations to act in the way that they have, and why those obligations are superordinate to the consequential arguments you might hear in the PMR. Second, I'll talk about why this policy will be effective, then I'll deal with their case. Firstly, we think that groups have constitutive obligations. That is, groups are given money, they are given support, they are given activism to advance the interests of the people who back them specifically. When I fund a group, I establish an implicit social contract with that group that in exchange for me forfeiting some control over my money, my time, my resources, they will act in what is my best interest. These are three of the first four warrants in their first on-case argument, just note that. The fourth of those warrants is a pragmatic argument, so we'll deal with that later, but these are sufficient to prove this point. We think these obligations are stronger to their specific funders, their specific believers, even if there is a larger segment of the queer public that might have different interests or different goals. That is, the queer public is divided in what it cares about. Like, we just don't want to treat groups as a monolith in this debate. And we think that to some extent, there will be at least some queer people that are invested in the notion of gun control. Trivially check this. There are Democratic queer people who support Democratic candidates that back gun control and donate to gun control supporting groups, as they themselves told you. So why do we think that these specific groups that are acting in this way are fulfilling a constitutive obligation? There are two reasons why. The first reason why, and this is actually the only reason that is sufficient to prove the argument, is that there is a revealed preference. These groups have access to information, they have access to polling, they have access to Google Insights data, they have access to Twitter engagement with their specific pages, which means that they are probably aware of what their members want. These groups also tend to have leadership that are selected, if not in a perfectly democratic way, then in a quasi-democratic way in which they are collecting information about what their members care about and then electing people. They may make arguments about how these groups have imperfect selection of leaders, but just note that any argument that they could make about what queer people really want is still more paternalistic than an argument about how these leaders are on a balance the best metric we have for what these specific supporters of the specific groups that did this care about. The second warrant, though, if you didn't buy that we can assess that the revealed preference is sufficient, then it's a debate about whether guns are good or bad for LGBTQ people. Without generalizing, we think guns in general are bad. The reason why is quite simple. And I'm going to pause now because I forgot to content warn. This will probably give the argument away, but I need 5 opt-ins for suicide. There's no graphic depiction, I'm just going to reference it. Thank you. Continuing. This is a bit of a fact claim, but I do think it's on the front page of the New York Times. 2/3 of gun deaths in the United States are suicides, and the #1 killer of queer people, aside from things like heart disease, for example, that kill old people, is suicide. more than murder, more than hate crimes. It's also a much more proximate harm because the kind of gun control policies that we talk about today are not the kinds of things that are going to prevent your day-to-day hate crime insofar as people can still get access to some degree of guns on either side, but there are things like having mandatory waiting periods that can weed out the most high-risk individuals that have the highest propensity to take their own lives, and at the local level, preventing these instances of suicide are what gun control advocates tend to care about. I also think that if our constitutive claims are true, these are reasons why these queer groups are particularly focused on those types of policies that have the highest propensity to help queer people. But again, this argument is not the most important. What matters is the revealed preference and the warrants we've given for why they act in this way. Why do we think that these implicit social contracts are superordinate to consequences? We think that the existence of social contracts is good as a whole, even if following true on individual contracts can be bad. Even if it's true that breaking this specific contract in a specific interest could increase net utility, we should respect reciprocal obligations in general because their existence enables people to make decisions and construct institutions that make the world better off, i.e. governments couldn't exist without such contracts. People would be unable to form reasonable expectations, for example, making donations, participating in any kind of economic exchange, having free trade, for example, without assurances that they will be respected on the flip side of their deal. Crucially, social contracts have to be enforced both when it's convenient and when it isn't in order for them to be credible. So this is a legitimate obligation even under a utilitarian worldview. Second constructive argument, funding gun control is good actually. Two aspects of this argument. First, this is a specific moment in which everyone is talking about gun control, and this will enable you to get long-term access to financial support. There are a couple of reasons why everyone is caring about gun control right now. A, it's the end of Obama's term and he can't get legislation through, so he's been focusing more on issues that have to deal with culture and local level policy, and gun control is one of them, since many of the major gun control groups pivoted to a state level, local level strategy decades ago after realizing that federal policy was doomed because of the courts and the NRA. Secondly, there's no pandemic right now, and there are gun killings every single month, so it's probably the highest order thing that's just happening in the news as a matter of fact. And finally, the Pulse massacre was a specific instance of the use of a semi-automatic rifle, and specifically, and this is spec, but it's true, the AR-15 rifle, which is everything that Democrats have been campaigning against for years. This is the poster child of the weapon that we don't want on the streets, but because it's on the streets, because it's so easy to access, people continue to die as a result of things like hate crime. So there's a huge base of liberal people who really care about gun control right now, and in this specific context, they particularly care. That discussion happens on either side of the house, which means backlash to that discussion also exists on either side of this house. So you can co-opt a lot of this energy. There is a huge wave of support for this right now, and you can get a ton of cash that would otherwise flow directly to these groups and not through you, or just flow to other groups like the Democratic National Committee more generally. Why is getting access to this funding good? One, having more of this money means you can exercise more leverage about how it is used. If it is true that gun control can be bad for queer people or can be good for queer people, what matters is whether queer people have some kind of democratic control and leverage over how that money is used into getting specific policy changes. We would prefer more mandatory waiting periods and less confiscation of guns from people enforced by the police, for example. Secondly, we think that you can establish new donor lists. Generally, when you get a huge amount of attention on something from people who are second order people who don't necessarily care about queer issues first, but care about gun issues first. And because today there's a huge issue of this Pulse massacre, they're going to care about queer issues first. If you can fundraise off of those people, you can bring people in who were not previously part of your donor list. Even if 10% of these people stick around as repeat donors just because they click the repeat box, that means that you increase your long-term carrying capacity of funding, not just now, but into the future. That means after this moment passes, you will have more money to fund all of the counterfactual things that were just not mechanized for why they would happen. But if they would happen, great, just do them tomorrow and every day thereafter with a larger pool of money. Finally, all of this money, even if they see there's like a trade-off between funding like Everytown or other groups like that, and that the people who fund like activistic groups are basically going to give the same amount of money on either side of the house, even if that's true, there's still an additional group of people that either A, are just not donating that much right now, but when they're made aware of something, would provide additional funding just because of the immediacy of the moment. And B, there are probably people who just give money directly to the Democrats because they're just kind of vaguely liberal on lots of issues, but transferring that money from the DNC to you is still preferable because it still gives you greater leverage over what candidates and what policies. Finally, funding and control will succeed at the local level, and you're likely to do this. Obviously, because of things like the NRA and the courts, and because it's so expensive, we won't do what their third argument says we'll do. We'll fund it at the local level. We'll focus on cases where the tipping point is $1 million to flip from 48 to 51 in a ballot initiative. We'll try to stop the downsliding of current gun control policies that do exist, but might be removed by the NRA, insofar as you're already financing the campaigns to get rid of these things. And having millions of additional dollars, plus having additional control over how those reasons are carried out, ensures that we are able to at least get some kind of tangible policy victories. And if it's true that guns are bad in many cases for queer people, then it's just another reason why it's also proposed a constitutive obligation case. First argument, they say you're an extension of the queer rights movement. First three warrants we concede. Fourth warrant, they say that compromise is inevitable when you expand your position. This is a narrow case. If we're proving that in this narrow case it is justified to expand your position insofar as there is a particular moment where this overlaps with your goals, then we're not setting a precedent for always expanding your position, just doing it in the case in which our warrants apply. Next, they say guns protect queer people. I've beaten this argument because A, we can have specific policies and we have incentives to pursue the policies that are better than the ones that they talk about, and B, and more importantly, they just haven't warranted why this protection is a more probable application than things like suicide. For example, we still think that, like, even if you have the gun, the asymmetry of power still favors the trained police officer who is physically large, who is trained to use a gun again and again and again, versus someone having to use the gun in the first time in a fight or flight response. Finally, to say there's no reason why gun control won't be used against queer people. Again, gun control exists on either side of the house, is about the marginality of the change. If they're right, the money is the same, and the only thing that matters is the marginality of the change. Next, they say it's bad for the movement. They say that core supporters will be less likely to donate. First of all, note that there are lots of different queer advocacy groups. So there are groups that are, for example, more libertarian on other issues like log cabin Republicans that are already getting access to all of the funding that they say is likely to lead you. That does not change. These are specific people that have the revealed preference to carry. The warrants for this argument beat this point. They say it's incredibly draining and expensive to buy court battles. You're not going to do this. They say the NRA is going to move to a culturally right position, but they have already done this. If it's good for the NRA to do this, these are all reasons why they've already done that, which means all of the right-wing backlash to queer issues and gun issues already exist symmetrically. So the local margin of change is enough for us to take the debate.
My report is to small.
Also, tonight, I realized I sat on the floor both rounds of judge me this weekend. I don't normally do this. I just don't want to record this very much. Honestly, I do sit on the floor a lot though, so maybe I do usually do this. Okay, I'm going to give some pleasantries.
Can give your pleasantries from behind the chair so that I can see it.
Oh, sure. Robert Devesh, I'm truly so glad that we are friends. I think Cody running is hard and exhausting, but it's much easier when you get to debate against people who you have fun debating. I'm really glad that we got to have some really cool econ debates. And I'm really glad that we're friends, and hopefully that will continue after this year when we have more free time to do things that aren't debate. Spectators and judges, thank you so much for being here. I think one of my favorite things about the debate and NAP specifically is the community space that exists, and being in person after a couple years is really just a reminder of how valuable that is to me. So I'm really grateful. GW team, I love you all so much. The amount of support that I have received from every single one of you is like more than I can ever say. And I'm just immensely grateful. Ananya, you've heard all of my good pleasantries. I'm sure you'll get some drunk texts over the next few days. My last pleasantry is from my dad, who's just been like the biggest supporter of my debate career and texted me good luck this morning. And it meant the world to me. And I'm really hoping that, just like I have every Saturday night for the last 4 or 8 years, I can call him with good debate updates. And the thing that brings me the most joy is that regardless of how this round and hopefully some other rounds go, it'll be good news, because this weekend has been truly the best end to debate that I could ask for.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it.
I believe the 2008 recession.
Okay. This is just gonna follow the order of LOC. Okay.
I'm glad you commented now.
I feel 72.
Okay. First, in response to the obligations argument, they say you have a constitutive obligation because people have given money and support in advanced interest. Not to be pedantic here, but I think it's probably worth noting that this case is time-spaced before you create the organization, so people have not yet been able to effectively express the revealed preference. Remember, it's not we believe that they should not have done this, we should not do this. It's active 10. I don't know, you probably shouldn't be voting on that, but I think it probably, I don't know that you'll be voting on that, but I think it is true. But I'm going to be the substance of the argument too, because I don't think this actually responds to the argument or why queer groups uniquely care about the control, like of a gun control perspective that exists already reality within the movement, right? Like these preferences have been expressed, and the more important preference that has been expressed is the divergence of opinion on issues. Because I think when you talk about a group like the queer movement, unlike groups like Democrats, where people do have tangible policy differences, if you think about most other policies that are important to the queer community, it's things like thinking that people should be able to get married. No one within the queer community disagrees that, like, I don't know, the fight for equal access to adoption rights is wrong, but people do vehemently disagree about gun control. This means this is a uniquely fracturing opportunity and moment within the movement because it truly is different. I think it is more likely to be the case then that as much as you are able to uphold constitutive obligations by becoming a very prominent group that is able to gain a lot of media attraction, you're also actively violating the constitutive obligation that you have to members of the queer movement who do not support gun control because they have actively expressed a revealed preference in the opposite direction. Why then do you weigh those people higher? I think those people are like the right-wing Republicans who have the least connection and access to queer spaces that are supportive for them. They're probably people who live in conservative areas who are more exposed to gun control, who maybe just like enjoy having guns because they like to go out and hunt. But I think these people are uniquely important because unlike people of color, unlike GMs, it is not the case that queer people are inherently grouped together by their visible characteristics. It is comparatively much more difficult to find groups, to find solidarity in groups within this movement. This means there'll be new obligation to people who are likely to be ostracized from the movement. I think you ought not distance them from the movement. Second, though, this doesn't interact with the cases on the questions on case about why even if queer people believe that gun control is good and important, there are other organizations that can respond to and who are likely to seek out queer voices that repulse. The second response here, though, that I want to give is I do not think they actually prove to you why the issues that you need to do specific parts of gun control for queer people are unique to queer people. Rather, the arguments they make about why you need to focus on like not having gun take back programs or protecting mental health are a result of the way that queer people's identities intersect with other aspects of their identities. The reason why people of color have specific incentives to care about certain types of gun control, and the reason why mental health advocacy groups have obligations to care about certain aspects of gun control. There's literally nothing queer about queer gun control. There are intersectional identities and you prioritize those. The reason though that this is winning for them is that those other groups already exist and are already able to fulfill the constitutive obligation that people who do care about gun control because of mental health or because of like violence against communities of color are able to express their preferences there. I think that takes out the constitutive obligations thing. They say that obligations are stronger to their specific believers. I beat this. They say some queer people are invested in the realm of gun control. Some are, but many aren't. The harm to advocacy queer gun control is going to get higher, given that the people who really have to like who has concerns about disproportionate criminalization and queer ownership, their arguments are in case here. Then they say it's reveal preference because Google Insights and Twitter. I think one queer rights to say reveal preference is not fulfilled by helping support other queer groups that like do things to preemptively prevent the need for gun violence or prevent mental health crises that are likely to lead to things like queer suicide. I think it's actually uniquely important because those are the organizations that are most effective in actually fulfilling this advocacy and doing better on it for the reasons to give you in case of the development of specificity and expertise within organizations. I'm not going to take POIs. Then they say guns are bad and they make the fact claim about suicide. I think first and probably this, if we're winning the arguments about why this preemptively trades off with other policy advocacy outcomes for the queer community, such as caring about mental health control or access to physical health control or having better community spaces, we are less likely to have these sorts of situations that actually like are things that lead people to consider suicide as an option. So I think you prefer preemptively preventing these at the point where we're winning a trade-off with the advocacy of other organizations that are fracturing within the queer community because of decrease in donations, then we're winning on the preemptive level there. But secondly, this entire argument is not actually principled. It is just a pragmatic and consequentialist argument about why it is the case that you want to prevent gun deaths. It's not just it's not a constitutive obligation because people have different preferences with the organization. I think then if we're winning the pragmatic likelihood of not having better gun control or actively having worse outcomes on gun control, you would not vote on this argument. Notably also though, Devesh points out the sex saying, which is that they use AR-15s for repulse shooting. The sort of gun control that target AR-15 and semi-automatic weapons is distinct from the sort of gun control that is important for actually preventing mental health and preventing suicide. So I'm unclear why you actually get that nuance that it is repulse shooting that is centering the advocacy of the Pride Fund and gun violence. Then on why, if the constituent is true, queer groups are more likely to focus on these issues. This bites into the arguments that are given in cases. It's the same reason that straight people care about gun control, because empirics about how many people die from suicide and the impact of straight people as well. But even if you don't buy that, I think queer people also get long-term access to that because of the auxiliary, that's because of pulse and existing fights against gun violence. They say the revealed preference means that you waive constitutional obligations over consequentialism, but it violates your constitutional obligations because it's a uniquely queer issue and trades off from actual queer issues where the only advocates are people who are doing things like fighting for the trans women without access to healthcare. Cool. Then they're like, you need to not break specific contracts because you should respect all of them normatively. I think there's no actual foundation to the contract that they tell you. It is just like the contract that they tell you is like if one person expresses a preference, then an organization has an obligation to do this. I think it's possible to evaluate whether or not we all respect the actions of groups and be evaluated as these different things. I think it is not actually likely the case that you have these contracts and the selling out into free trade and requiring contracts. I think fundamentally this argument is just saying when you have a debate about something other than the need of the substance, then you should force them to engage in the arguments that are important here. Then they say that funding for gun control is good because everyone cares about it, and they post you're likely to have a high profile issue. First, Trump's campaigning on this means that attention already exists. It's unclear why it's unique tipping point. Given that this is broadly, the Brady Fund and Long-Term Gun Violence Group already exist. And they say people die because of hate crimes and potentially suicide. I think AR-15 that is off the same fund with saving lives and suicides. So the unclear way you have spillover benefits. They say you can get a lot of funding that you flow elsewhere. This is actually bad because it detracts from the funding that it's already going to the group, more likely to be specialized and effective. They say it matters because queer people have specific leverage. I think the intersectionality arguments speak this, but two other groups, when it comes to the DNC and other groups having these groups have incentives to include queer people and include their advocacy to make them better to the public because they're responsive to most recent queer targeted attack, but also seem more inclusive, galvanizing knowing about gun control and gun violence right now. It's just unclear to me why you cannot look at people who are specialized in doing gun control violence, who have all of these connections, who have all of these donor lists, and they just sell you the fucking donor list or give you the fucking donor list. You think you can run ads about it or not going to be preferable. They say you get more donor lists, and it's unclear to me why these people are not just going to be symmetrically incentivized to donate to existing organizations by the general conversation around the Pride Fund is completely preferable. Then they say even if there's a trade-off, there's still an additional group of people who are not donating. This is a warrant people who perceive the immediacy of the movement of gun control, specifically the other queer movements. But also they say like you get translate money to you. The governments are bad. The arguments of case law now you have to endorse candidates who might be good for gun control, but bad for other queer issues like employment or discrimination is probably preferable, but probably worse for the outcome of the movement in the long term. The characterization is third argument, who would like to meet those people is incredibly important. Then they say the funding is going to succeed. You can do the thing in like a state level race. One, you are just ineffective because you haven't specialized in the past. The startup cost is high to effective organizing is incredibly high because you have to find experts who are familiar with what it takes to perform or the connections with local politician groups. You probably pull people away from more established organizations like the Brady Fund to End Gun Violence who do have those state level connections instead of letting them work together in an effective block against gun control. Get the galvanized donations of people who care about polls and do the work that they're really fucking good at doing. You spend all the time that you could be using to galvanize action in this incredibly potentially tipping point moment to actually just do change with existing organizations. I think that's more powerful and a more direct link in a change. You get the increase in donations because people care about this, or they go donate to other organizations that do preventative care for people that are already existing. On case, they say it's a narrow case, it's justified now because there's a reason why it overlaps. You justify the exception once, then you can continue to justify it in the future. I think it's clearly not responsive to the argument. There are always going to be moments like this. These tipping points to be on whether this is uniquely queer issue. There's something to the arguments that are early in case law, how the reasons where people care about gun control are already supported and represented. They say specific policies and incentives pursue better policies. If the specific policies and incentives exist, it means that every time in Brady will already do the work because of the arguments I gave you off case. They see the marginality, then marginally change. I think Pride Fund is uniquely inexperienced and consider get change effectively. It's incredibly difficult to pass gun control, even on a local level. Let the people who are experts in existing organizations that exist and don't know do it. They say a lot of different groups are already caring about advocacy. The problem is that joining in with gun control because of the one after polls, dominating the conversation with criminal policies. Tremendously to get less movement on our organizations where the potential advocacy with people is much higher with marginal return. Then they say the NRA is doing this and they're right in backlash. Backlash is made because of the association with queer people who are perceived as being incapable of interacting with guns and law enforcement.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Member Thorne and Member
People hear that.
I'm really glad I did. I don't like hearing cracking.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. I will also give some pleasantries because I forgot to do it when I did PM in round 4 PMC. But seriously, to echo Devesh, it's been a pleasure getting to know y'all over the course of this year. I gave the longer version of this before PMR, I think, in round 4. But like something that you said yesterday, Robin, really stuck with me, which is that we don't have to, or I guess there's probably like a perception on the league that we were always hyper competitive, like out to get each other's necks. And I just like cannot say how I did not, or like how much I felt that that was not the case. And I'm really grateful to you both for that. Thank you for being exceptional opponents and friends throughout the course of the year. To the judges in the room, thanks. Vote for us. Seriously though, you all don't have to be here, so it does mean a lot. To the spectators, I hate you. Just kidding. I hate all of you except Patrick, because I went to high school with Patrick. Also, and Jasmine, who I also went to high school with, Bel Air Hedge. Seriously though, finally to Devesh, everything that you said in your thank you is true for me as well. We had an interesting conversation last year on my back porch that commanded us to effectively, thank you for moving to the correct side, Patrick. It commanded us to do this stupid thing, and it's been a blast. Okay, it's going to be an overview. Everyone ready? The round-winning argument is that on the margins, we better align the queer community's interest in local governments where they can actually affect change. What we gave to you from the LOC is that one, there's symmetric backlash from organizations like the NRA against queer people already in the status quo. And two, there's a lot of incentives for people to donate to gun control initiatives in the status quo. This is because there was a hugely visible recent massacre. There were a bunch of other warrants that were dropped in the MG that Devesh gave to you. What this means is that there is going to be an amount of money that is going to go to gun control groups on either side of the house, and the backlash is going to be symmetric on either side of the house. Where then do we affect marginal change that creates better policy outcomes for queer people? What we told you is that you have the ability to control how this money is implemented. Even though it was an AR-15 that was the culprit of the shooting, the fact that you are the one who gets the donations means that you can affect change in ways that are beneficial to the queer community. It means that if there's some money that is going to gun control, you can say, ah, yes, now we have a lot of this chunk, we can put our issues to the forefront, endorse politicians, endorse courts, or endorse or fight legal battles that help us do what we need to do to most benefit queer people. This means that we have access to things like mandatory weights for buying guns. It means that we will not do policies that will hurt queer people in rural areas, like take away their guns, meaning we still get this deterrence argument symmetrically. This is where we win the round. This is what they missed in MG. This is enough for us. Let's go to the off case flow. I want to talk about the principle very quickly, because I don't think that it's true that the principle is simply a pragmatic claim. They said that it is time-space before you create these organizations, and thus there is no possible revealed preference argument. But what we told you is that people have expressed an interest in donating to specific queer advocacy groups in exchange for gun control legislation. They're sending this money in, which means that you have this constitutive obligation. What they cannot do on their side of the house is fiat a change in the people's beliefs that exist in the status quo. What does this mean? It means that people have this preference. It means that they're donating money with an express intention for you to uphold what is good for them, and that on their side of the house, they aren't doing it. Then they say that it's more important to recognize that there is a divergence of opinions. Yes, and this is why you are collecting donations from a few people in queer groups and using that money to advocate for change in local areas where this best benefits them. We can recognize that there is divergence in opinions, yet nonetheless take actions that benefit the people who are supporting us. They don't have an a priori claim here to what is good for queer people. What we tell you is that the best way to figure out what is good for queer people is where they are donating their money. Okay, then they say that this is going to fracture the movement. First, we told you that it's likely going to be the case that you are doing this in local areas where you think that you can affect change in ways that do not harm the movement, so it doesn't garner the sort of national attention that they talk about. Second, we told you that it's probably the case that these candidates that you are going to support, say in elections, are already candidates that would be good for you on either side of the house and are going to be, to some degree, elected symmetrically. It's just a matter of enforcing the issues that you think are good in their political platforms. I'm going to deal with this fracturing when I get to the on-case material in more detail. Then they say that it's going to hurt people who live in conservative areas. I beat this already. They're not the ones that are going to be funding these changes. But second, we're not going to affect gun control that is going to take away queer people's only ability to defend against the police, right? Like we are not getting rid of the ability for queer people to own handguns, for example, which is the way that they can deter things like hate crimes if you believe the on-case material is true. Then they say that other organizations can do it and they will do it better. Here's the uniqueness that we get. First, on the measure of funding, we tell you that queer groups are able to bring more money to them than other organizations would be able to bring because they're able to capture on specific media attention surrounding how guns interact with the queer community. This means that there is likely a bigger pool of money on our side of the house. But second, what we told you is that this money goes to better uses for the queer community because now on our side of the house, the queer community and these groups are able to actually affect change that is beneficial to them. Sure, there is nothing queer about gun control, but queer people have different types of gun control preferences and gun control needs, and that's what we affect on our side of the house. Then they say it's unclear why this is a revealed preference. You have polling, people say that they donate. Then they say that other organizations are better. We tell you that this doesn't trade off. It brings attention to the movement in the worst case scenario, and that you can be good as well. They say that you can't be a good organization here. This is jumping a little bit down the flow because you don't have the expertise to make sure that change is effected in a good way. What we tell you is that obviously you're not going to hire a lawyer by yourself to fight these court battles. What you do is send your money to other organizations that do have expertise in this area, but you control the actions that those organizations take because now you have the leverage of being the ones who are providing the money. This means we get the benefits of being able to have political expertise, but we also get the benefits of having a bigger piece of the pie, i.e. more money, but we also get the benefits of creating better gun control policies for queer people. This is a principled argument because we told you that even in instances where there might be a singular exception. So if you believe that the on-case material is true and you believe they're winning the Prague, we said that it's better to default to principled obligations because by constructing a set of rules that create maximally positive outcomes across the board, you are best able to affect positive change in the long run. What this means is that you should default to the rules that we create, i.e. uphold these social obligations, these social contracts, because they create the best outcomes over the most number of situations, which means that in instances of uncertainty, which we hope this debate is not one of, but in case it is, you should default to the one that has better rules. Okay, let's go to our second contention about why funding gun control is good. I think they miss a lot of things. We tell you that there's a huge wave of support right now. We also think that the kind of regulations that we get are unique to queer groups being able to control the policy. They say it's distinct from gun control that's preventing suicide. We tell you one, I already answered this above actually. Then they say that detention already exists. What we say is that we get benefits because we have queer-led gun control that changes the focus on problems that queer people face. Also, the attention that you get is uniquely better because you're able to say, you're able to capture on a wave of media attention that brings people or makes people aware that this is a queer specific issue, which increases the pool of the pie. I already answered all of this. Finally, they say that you can sell donor lists. This is like an argument that we think doesn't make much sense. You don't have leverage. This is a one-time situation, and this is the only instance in which you can capture a new donor list. We also told you that you bring a lot of people into donating for queer policies that otherwise wouldn't donate to queer policies. Finally, the marginal change is that it going through you is good. Okay, go to the Gov case. I'm just going to beat all of their potential collapses. The first is that this will cause more exceptions in the future. First, we would say that this is a good type of exception, but second, just note that their argument is just a slippery slope here. It is literally a logical fallacy. What we say is that this is a particular moment, so there's no precedent for doing it when there's a really important thing that we can do. Second, we tell you that no one is going to advocate for taking away all guns, which means that the kind of deterrence against hate crimes that they talk about is symmetric on either side of the house, meaning that you are not going to, like, for example, face larger repression in conservative areas. But second, you are not going to face the kind of political backlash in conservative areas because these areas will not see the kinds of change that we talk about because it will happen at local levels in areas where you can win. Realistic regulation means we access the deterrence arguments on our side of the house. Finally, I want to beat their third argument about how the gun control is going to be blamed as a gay conspiracy. Devesh, I think, beat this argument handedly. What we told you is that it is probably the case that the NRA already has the incentives to crack down or at least portray gay people in a negative light because it means that they are able to capture on the political fear that conservatives and religious zealots face. What this means is that they expand their voting blocks in good times, which means that it is probably true that they've already done this. In fact, I will just say it is true. They have done this. We're allowed to be spec. This means that they have no unique backlash arguments. Finally, what we say, actually, I'm out of time. Devesh will weigh all this shit, but exceptionally proud to oppose.
Leader of opposition.
Is everyone good? Okay. You are one eloquent motherfucker. Let's start time. Yeah. The first reason we win is the principle. I want to be clear, the responses we heard in MG all fed into the argument that we set up. We heard three categories of responses. First, we said that even if you break this contract, that doesn't mean free trade goes away, but our entire point is that we should respect social contracts or implicit social contracts as a rule, even if you cannot prove the consequentialist link chain to how it causes other contracts to fall apart. The reason why is that if people can make the justification that I'm willing to break this contract in the case in which I think it will lead to a more desirable state of affairs, then people can never be ensured that those implicit social contracts will hold when the going gets tough or when the other side believes that this will happen. That is the reason why if you believe that contracts are good and there are contractarian warrants and there are cases for why they are, then you should respect this in all cases. I want to be clear, the first debate is a normative question about what the term should means, and then the second debate is under that definition of should, what is the most important impact? This is a normative argument about what should means, which is respecting constitutive obligations. Everything else flows from those arguments. They say your specific supporters don't necessarily care about this. Our entire argument is that if individual groups of people have given you time, resources, etc., to be a representative agent, you have to care about what they want, and they conceded in POCs that we can characterize who specifically is likely to do this. Our argument is just that the folks that care about this are probably the ones that are doing it, and the folks that don't care about it are probably the ones that are not doing it. That then means the second category of responses they gave you also don't matter, which is that queer people are diverse. There are Republican queer people. There are people who don't necessarily agree on these issues, fine, but the people who are likely to do this are the ones that do care about these issues. We give you a good warrant for why this is likely to be the case on their own case as well, which is that there are conservative groups like log cabin Republicans and libertarian groups that capture all of the right-wing queer people that they're talking about. So the specific groups that are likely to do this, or the specific individuals that are likely to do this, are the ones in which the leaders were elected on a basis of information and platform, democratic decision-making, such that they have the best pragmatic and normative claim to what these people care about, far better than the paternalistic conception you get from them, which attempts to basically group queer people as a monolith, or at minimum to characterize monolithically the fact that they will always disagree about these issues. It doesn't matter if it's a queer issue or a straight issue, it matters it's an issue that queer people care about in this circumstance. This fulfills the constitutional obligation, so they should do it on the principle. The round is over. The second reason we win is the prag. There are three ways you can try to beat this argument. One, they say there's a trade-off from other money. Even if they prove that trying to stop the source of things like suicide is better than trying to get rid of guns, we can beat this argument on the extensive, not the intensive margin. That is, even if a greater share of any given dollar is going towards things that are good on their side, if we have more dollars available to us in all successive periods, we will fund all of those things more. I made the response.
I think that the argument about prevention care is an LOC or ACTV or something like that response. And
Sorry, so really quickly, can you explicitly flag the argument with a little more detail so I know exactly what's called now?
yeah, so the roughly last like 20 seconds of Devesh talking about how like if you have more money, you'll be able to do more for preventative care outcomes in the long term, as well as like why it's the intensive versus expensive thing. I think this is distinct from anything that's been around.
All right, all I'm going to say is that in the LOC, I said that you get access to a new pool of funding that uniquely does not exist right now, and that given that you have additional funding, in every period after this one, you will have greater money available to fund all of the good things that they talk about, referencing their third point. They may have introduced another good thing in the MG, that doesn't change the functional form of the argument.
Cool. The members of the panel will take it under consideration.
Okay. Second way they can get around this is various types of backlash arguments. The thing is, their arguments are all set up as incentive arguments. That is, it will make the NRA more effective if they do A, B, C, D, E. Great, that's the reason why they're doing it to a maximal extent right now, especially when they can see there's a huge discussion about the NRA and discussion about gun control and financing of gun control right now. They have every incentive to make it a clear issue either way. Finally, to say you will lose support from specific people, but again, all of our arguments about the revealed preference indicates that the types of people that you would be likely to lose support from are not donating to you right now. They're either donating to the conservative libertarian groups or to other liberal groups that are just not the ones making this specific decision. So again, you don't stand to lose a lot of support. Why are we better off on our side? There's two reasons why. One, we increase the pool of available money. What we say is that a lot of people, not just people who rank queer issues first, care about gun issues right now, but in the context of polls, they'll be incentivized to donate to you because you can seize on this particular moment. And when these people get more exposure to your issues, some of them, at least 10% of them, will be incentivized to stay as repeat donors. That's a new pool of money that you have access to in every successive period. Secondly, we told you that you have more leverage over how policy decisions are made. I want to be clear here. we told you, and they conceded, that there's going to be a huge amount of the financing of these issues on the other side of the house, then it doesn't matter if these issues are good or bad, just about whether, on a balance, a dollar from a queer organization, which is being used with specific conditions, will do more for queer people than a dollar coming from another organization. And our argument is it always will, because there's incentive alignment. That means that they will fund ballot initiatives, for example, in places where they can win. It means that they will fund policy initiatives that stop the problems that affect queer people. It'll be things like preventing instances of suicide, or even if you are getting rid of AR-15s, it'll be in jurisdictions where the cops don't have a record of confiscating guns from queer people. These are all comparative and marginal reasons why the dollar will be better off on our side. They have not made any unique or exclusive claims to why they will have access to a unique pool of money that they can fund their good things with. We're not using money that's going towards those things. We're using new money, and even if we're not using new money, the increase in the carrying capacity of your organization writ large means that you will be better off in every successive period. Exceptionally proud to oppose.
Here.
So from good. At the top, I want to cleanly outweigh and beat the contractualism arguments, because the best version of this argument comes out of MO when they tell you that you take donations from queer people and should respond to issues that queer people care about. Here's why this is cleanly beaten by PMC and MG. First, this is actually a gut argument. Your constituent obligation as a queer advocacy is to advocate for unique queer issues, not just issues queer people care about. This is a trade-off if you're suddenly adopting another issue that isn't inherently queer and it's a unique queer voice. The lack of queer incentive to want gun control, there's a uniquely queer reason to care about gun control. As an intersectional issue, you are likely to care most about protecting people with mental illness and people of color who are already getting attention in gun control organizing anyways. The second this fights, yeah, go for it.
I think that there was an LOC argument.
Yep, it's an MG too.
No, but that you cannot characterize the incentives or the wants of queer people as monolithic, which means that this response, which is an application to that argument, cannot be made.
Okay, so again, same thing I asked, hold on, same thing I asked Robin. Can you flag explicitly the response that you think is in it?
So I think that it is a new response to say that like queer people have an interest specifically in mental health that is unique to queer people, and that they can intuit this interest.
Yeah, so
This is the MG argument I make a couple of times about intersectionality between the reasons queer people care about gun control and other like mental health and community and color.
Okay.
Okay, cool. I think I know what both sides are saying. We can all take it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah.
okay.
Sorry.
I have that in at 31 seconds. But this also begs the harms on trade-offs for actual queer issues that no one else is advocating for. Trans women having healthcare, ID gender laws, bathroom bills, employment discrimination. This never happens on their side of the house. Second, Robert Nice this argument in MO, and he says that it's an issue queer people care about, but queer people care about a lot of things, including more queer specific things. Queer folks aren't a monolith when it comes to gun control. The arguments we give you in PMC and NMG about how for rural queer people, the threats of state violence means guns are the only route to self-defense. You uniquely care about these individuals because first, there isn't a check back to rural cops attacking or threatening queer individuals. Second, these individuals are already less likely to find safety being out in their community. Third, rural states, when you do local organizing, which is their best case scenario counterfactual, use this to disproportionately criminalize queer people because they can be more discriminatory at a state level that they cannot at a national level. Fourth, queer movements are the only spaces that these people have because they cannot organize on visible characteristics like skin color, which means your broad access to people in the movement on uniquely queer things is significantly more important than more unique. MO says that you don't fracture unless you achieve policy, but it's a signaling mechanism. When I'm a queer advocacy group and I start supporting gun control, I also tell queer and rural queers who need gun control to not happen that I do not care about this. Once you justify the really important thing once, you can keep justifying really important things for the rest of your time. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, this isn't an argument. So in the LOC, we made the argument about how, like, for example, people who disagree with this, conservative queer people, are already invested in other organizations, and therefore they're not going to abandon you. You're now creating a new mechanized argument for how you send a signal of some sort and therefore alienate people from your movement.
Yeah, so the argument is an MO that you don't fracture unless you achieve policy that is going to negatively harm people. This is a response to that MO mechanism about when you end up fracturing the movement and when you don't.
I think also it's important to note this. I think the argument maybe is specific to impacts of queer individuals and their relationship with the queer movement because of gun control. It isn't about allies.
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do, because this is a lot of fun. as much as I love doing it. I think I understand the argument that is being called new. I understand the justification for providing the argument. The panel is going to evaluate the point of consideration or the point of order specifically as, and the discussion that the panel will have is whether or not this is a new response to an MO argument or using existing like law, both whether it's a new response to an MO argument and also if it isn't a new response to the MO argument, if all like the material to make the argument exists already in the realm. So we'll evaluate both those things. We'll take into consideration.
Cool. I have that I'm at 132. You weigh this about the contractual arguments because people must be able to access a movement before they can inspect specific policy preferences, especially when that movement inherently caters to an immutable characteristic that people only have access to organizing in this space. Cool. Next place you can vote is on how this impacts the gun violence movement. I don't think they've heard you specifically why this is likely to be the tipping point or a significant change on the ability for gun control to be passed. The most important argument here is the one that Robin gives you about the direction of resources away from effective groups, endorsing politicians, trying to lobby, etc. is resource intensive, and the startup cost it gets for you to be effective in doing this compared to Brady or every town is always going to be really significant. The MO response is that you'll just get more donations and you can give your money to organizing or existing organizations. This drains your resources you spend on overhead. The same people who will be galvanized to donate to the Pride Fund will want to donate to the Brady Fund's campaign following Pulse too. It's not unique, it still feels queer. 3 years, next reason we give you in PNC and MG that you can't control isn't a uniquely queer issue. There's already an incentive to include queer voices in the dialogue and discourse because Pulse is so salient and queer people can be a part of other organizations. Push them harder to include queer voices. They can never do that when they're working in their own bubble instead. So when they say that maybe there's going to be some quantity of better gun control, they don't prove to you uniquely, but you need to do this to access that. The marginal impact you have in this field, in this arena of advocacy is not going to be a payoff. It is consistent or linear with the amount of effort and violation of constitutive obligation that you have to put in. If gun control happens, it's going to happen and be similarly good on either side of the house. They've proven to you why the tipping point of not organizing for another group and having your own unique group working in a bubble is actually going to be the tipping point. They never tell you why there's a distinct from just donating to the Pulse Fund at every time. Next place you can vote is on how this impacts other queer advocacy, because they haven't also proved to you why you're tipping point on gun control, but you do harm queer advocacy. You have limited resources. Taking on new and unrelated issues is bad because of trade-offs. The slippery slope is just true, and the more issues that you adopt that are uniquely queer, the more you fracture and fragment your movement on policy preferences rather on immutable characteristics when you are the only advocacy space that they can actually access. Queer advocacy is significantly easier to rally around queer supporters that isn't just about legislation. This trades off in both funding and attention and momentum to these things. This means that people who are still galvanized by Pulse will still donate more after Pulse happens. When you advocate for queer specific issues, we can more directly increase access donations because people can donate to both gun control and to other queer issues in response to Pulse. This is also secondarily actively detracts from other pushes for queer advocacy that are likely to have significantly larger impacts on daily lives. And again, the argument Robert gives you about how this prevents people from looking to suicide and other options that require that gun control on their side of the house. Because first, the resource and time trade-off I've already made, but second, you can't hold politicians accountable to do that other work and pass better policies on employment discrimination and bathroom bills when you also have to take into account their stance on gun control when you do things like lobbying and endorsements and have to eventually compromise on which of those things you care more about, and it's always likely to actually harm the queer people who are the most marginalized. Last thing is on how this impacts members of your movement. This is the fully dropped argument that comes out of PMC, and the third argument, Robert's responses in MO aren't actually adequate. These are also the most important groups in the round because they drop the framing about how you have the most obligation to queer people individually as a queer rights movement and as queer rights advocacy groups. Notably, the broad NRA demonizes queer folks as responsive to these arguments that relate to specific incentives of potentially aligned groups. First, libertarians TM, these are the specific number of people who have very high quantities of money that are likely to donate to your queer organizations because they support queer people. This is the tipping point you get into actual queer advocacy. When libertarians donate to you, you have resources to be able to lobby politicians on uniquely queer issues. When they perceive you as being opposed to gun violence, which is something that they might support gun control or might support gun rights, you're less likely to donate. This pushes them away and cuts back against the money that the queer movements actually need. Second, on queer people, these are the most important people in the movement. If you're a queer advocacy group, you care about queer issues and queer people who want to do that organizing. When you blend yourself together with broad Dem groups or broad lefty groups like the DNC, you're less likely to be able to hold groups like the DNC accountable to actually doing better queer things. This is the argument in PNC that is fully dropped. Next, these are the people for whom protection from the state is exceptionally important. They see the state as oppressive, but they are super important to buy into your movement because they also do the most radical advocacy. This is preemptive in PMC too, about how state level reform is uniquely the worst when it comes to gun control because in conservative states, it's the way people are able to criminalize violence or weapon ownership by queer people in the first place. What does this mean? By connecting yourself to the gun control movement, you alienate both fringes of the movement. You first lose the dollars that you actually need to be able to do any organizing that affects uniquely queer issues. You second lose the actual constitutive obligations because you fractured queer people on believing that policy preferences are more important than immutable characteristics when you are the only movement that can actually access them. So it's far more challenging to push for other issues that are important, that are uniquely queer, like bathroom laws and employment discriminations, and that affect broader groups of your constituency. They always violate the constitutive obligation on that level. Very, very powerful.
Make it